a lot of content creators, a lot of influencers online, for the sake of marketing and for the sake of social media, do really reduce the effectiveness of their workouts purely to make it look more Instagrammable or marketable, when in reality you're actually limiting what you're providing to your clients, to your audience, just because it looks a bit nicer. It always throws me off when I'm filming the day, just because there's so much light occurring in this room. I just feel a bit bright, to be honest. And I'm pale enough as it is. I really don't want to make that any worse. It's a nightmare. Do you know what isn't a nightmare? The new video we're about to film, and the new video you're watching right now. Basically, what's occurring is this. I was actually going to do a video in which I react to some TikToks, talk about some bits and bobs, and sprinkle some tidbits of information here and there. This was sent to me in the Discord, and I thought, you know what? This is a great video to look at. It's very workout focused. I do really like workout focused videos, and I have very much previously been a fan of Hanna in the past. So today we're going to look at Hanna Öberg and her Follow Me to the Gym, My New Lower Body Routine. But there are a few things in this video that have tickled me that I want to address, and things that I want to talk about which will hopefully benefit you in your training. Before we do so, obviously you know what must be done. If at any point you decide you like the video, please let me know you like the video by liking the video. 1,300 likes in the first 24 hours is the goal, so if we reach that, that'd be bloody amazing. If you haven't already, please do consider clicking the red button down below and subscribing to the channel, and maybe even the bell next to it so you get notified when I upload every week, twice a week. And if you have a question you want me to answer at the end of the next video, please do consider dropping it down below for comment question of the week, and I shall do so. I'm gonna be straight with you, gonna be honest. This hat is a bloody humdinger, but I don't know if it's gonna fit on my head. In fairness, considering it's for kids, it does kind of fit on my head. I'm actually kind of impressed by that, because if you ever meet me in person, you will probably think, wow, Harry, your head really is quite big, and it is incredible. I'm very much putting that down to my height, but I've got to blame something, don't I? Thanks, Mum. The first half of this video is very much Hanna talking about her clothing launch and all those bits and bobs. So we'll skip forward to the actual workout, and we'll discuss some things. We won't talk too much about the warm-up, because obviously I've spoken about warm-ups before. Just know that I am very much a fan of warming up. I feel like it's very important. And when it comes to warming up, there are a few things I want to address there. Doing dynamic movements and like mobility, such as Hanna is doing here, big fan of. I do tend to avoid static stretches during warm-up periods. If I am going to static stretch before working out, I ensure that I'm giving myself enough time for the static stretching to then not hinder my workout, so 15 or 20 minutes. But typically I would focus very much on dynamic movement, like so. And also maybe a bit of cardio beforehand. Nothing extensive or anything crazy like that, but more maybe walking on the treadmill for 5 or 10 minutes just to make sure that the heart rate's elevated slightly, the body's warmed up, and you've essentially warmed up the oil of the car before taking it for a proper spin. That's that sort of thing, you know? There is a second part of warming up I am going to cover, but I need to wait for Hanna to discuss it because there's a reason why.
So 2 of these 6 sets will be warm-up sets to help you find the weights on what you are pushing with on the 4 working sets.
We'll go to warm-up sets first, so that's kind of like the second part of warming up I did want to speak about. Is I think warm-up sets are very important for essentially priming the muscles and priming the movements, essentially. If you were to go straight from your dynamic warm-up, which we've just seen Hanna do previously, to your working weight on a movement, there's a high likelihood that your performance during that working set may be negatively impacted if you haven't actually warmed up through that movement sufficiently. But I do typically like at least 2 or 3 warm-up sets, especially before my first exercise. So if I were doing hip thrust, for example, I would do probably at least 3 warm-up sets, depending on how heavy I'm going, maybe even more than that, to be honest. It very much does depend, like I said, on the exercise and how heavy you are going relative to you, because strength is relative. And another consideration, even after you warmed up for your first exercise, and even if you are very warm, I still almost kind of warm up for the following exercises too, or most of them anyway. So if it's a compound or multi-joint movement, so let's say I did hip thrust and I did squats and RDLs, I'd warm up for those as well. Not because I'm not warm, but I treat them more as like familiarization sets, so I get familiar with the movement and my body and muscles are primed to go through the range of motion I'm about to take them through. It won't be excessive because I'm merely trying to prepare for the movement. I'm not trying to waste energy during those warm-up sets. And when it gets to isolations and stuff towards the end of the workout, I likely wouldn't do any familiarization sets for them. I'd probably just crack on. So again, it really does depend on the movement, the load, and where in the workout that movement is. But especially for the earlier movements in a session, please don't neglect to warm up within the movement as well as externally beforehand. 6 sets, we'll call it 4 sets because the first 2 are warm warm-up sets, so therefore we've got 4 working sets, is a bit excessive, I will be honest. I typically, depending on what the goal is and what I'm training for, if it's more powerlifting focused, a bit different, but primarily for hypertrophy, I would tend to limit to about 3 working sets. And I did actually cover this in a comment question of the week question a few weeks ago. The hip thrust itself is pretty solid technique. The big thing here is Hanna trying to keep those shins vertical on the hip thrust. A lot of people will either shoot their feet too far forward or too far back, which then obviously alters knee angle. Again, if you're getting additional knee flexion where your knees are now traveling a bit too much on the hip thrust, you're bringing the quads a bit more into it, things like that. To kind of maximize glute engagement and minimize engagement of other muscles, we do want to try and keep those shins vertical, as Hanna is doing here, so that's fantastic. The reps do seem a bit rushed. Obviously, the hip thrust very much works the glutes in their shortened position. That shortened position is obviously the top of the rep, the most contracted position when the muscle is shortest. Therefore, you typically want to kind of hold that shortened position for a little bit of time. So doing a brief pause at the top at peak contraction for half a second to a second or so. Again, I don't know if this is sped up or anything, but her eccentric is ever so slightly fast, I would say. Just everything seems a bit fast, and I feel like a bit more control could be thrown into it. Not so much the concentric, so the way up, I think that's fine, but more the pause or lack thereof, and the eccentric, so the way down. So you see how Hanna's got this bench on that slight decline, and she's resting on that. A lot of people kind of lean on the side of the bench when the bench is completely flat, and that can be a bit too high and not particularly comfortable or not particularly great for optimizing range of motion for this movement. Putting it on a decline bench like so is a really great idea when doing hip thrusts. Really good range of motion from Hanna there. You see her knee was, could probably get half a centimetre or a centimetre lower, but it's really not going to make or break a physique. But it was really getting close to that floor and trying to get that kneecap to tickle the floor, which you know we love to see.
My hair. I feel like myself again. Even though I like to try out new things, this is me, and it just feels 100%.
Although this is not really relevant to the topic of the video and the kind of workout itself, I do appreciate even just minor conversations about feeling better in yourself and doing things for you. So obviously Hanna just spoke about her hair. She likes trying new things, but she says like this is her. I think that having that solid kind of thought and idea of you is really important, and I really respect that. So even if it comes to small things like your clothing, your hair, whatever it may be, dressing or looking how you want to look for you, whilst obviously trying to limit the considerations of how other people want you to look, which I know is always going to be a factor, but something we can always work towards. I just wanted to quickly touch on that and just basically state that I think it's great to see Hanna doing things that she feels is for her and makes her more like her. Love to see that. I think one of the fundamental principles of hypertrophy is obviously mechanical tension, and another fundamental principle which then can lead to the increase in mechanical tension is progressive overload. Obviously hypertrophy refers to the building of muscle mass, and mechanical tension is essentially determined largely by your proximity to failure. So obviously if you're going to failure, you would yield greater mechanical tension within the muscle than if you were going 7 reps away from failure, sort of thing. So it's not so much how much weight you are lifting, because your body and your muscles don't know what that 70 kilos is 70 kilos. What it does know is your proximity to failure. And then by default, if you're going to failure or close to failure, the kind of 0 to 4 reps in reserve, like green zone that we've spoken about before, it is probably going to be very heavy. But the thing to remember about heavy and strength is it is relative to you. Less comparing yourself to other people, less thinking about how much somebody else is lifting in comparison to you, and what really matters is proximity to failure. And although we can grow in all rep ranges, we do consider 5 to 30 to be the optimal rep range for hypertrophy.
But if you want to challenge yourself with the weights and aim 6 till 8 reps, it is okay to rest more. Instead of keeping the rest time low, you can keep the rest time longer and push for 6 till 8 reps instead. That's totally up to you.
Rest periods are largely dependent on the goal, the person and the exercise. So typically you would likely rest for a shorter period if you're doing a leg extension versus a barbell squat. See more things recruited during a barbell squat, more moving parts, more things to recover. So largely rest period, like I said, is very much subjective and dependent on the person. You may recover quicker than I can. Ow, bang my elbow, that's never good. You may recover quicker than I can, which is fine. But typically for most people, when looking at hypertrophy, if you are training hard, so close to failure, or if not to failure, we would typically say about 3 to 5 minutes is where a lot of the research has seen like the best results regarding rest periods. Does that mean you need to rest for that long? No, but I'm just saying, but typically for myself and hypertrophy in mind, for most people, I would say try and rest for at least 3 minutes. provided you are really pushing the weights and pushing the exercises to where they need to be when looking at failure. But at the end of the day, when it comes to rest period, you need to rest as long as you need to rest. You've got to kind of go through the checklist of, do you feel ready to go? Is your breathing back? Are the surrounding muscles recovered enough to go again? And is the target musculature you're looking to primarily work ready to go again before you then embark on the journey of the next set, we'll say. Once you tick all those boxes, which typically may fall within, let's say, the 3 to 5 minute range, then you're probably ready to go again. Don't get lazy with rest periods. If you're ready to go after 3 minutes, don't sit there for 20 contemplating life and saying, you know what, I don't want to do another set of split squats, because you're going to do them anyway. Rip the plaster off, rip it off.
Oh, I basically hate myself for putting in leg extension as a third exercise.
Hanna's layout kind of means structure being hip thrusts, reverse lunges, leg extensions. Good structure, good structure. I think for most people you would typically want to structure multi-joint movements first and then isolations after. Not for everybody, and that's not always the case. And we have the argument of injuries that come into it, dominant muscle groups. Then we have the consideration, which I know a lot of people are going to ask me about, pre-exhausting the muscle, which I think I could ramble on about for a long time, which I will definitely do in the future. So the leg extension, fantastic isolation movement. I've spoken about this before. It's the movement that shortens the quads the most compared to like other movements. You get that full knee extension here. The big thing with the leg extension is Hanna, again, it seems like she's rushy it a bit. Because it's a shortened position dominant movement, I would typically try and hold that contraction for a second or so you're holding that shortened position. Obviously, Hanna's leaning back against this pad. Quadricep, which is obviously this muscle here on the top, the kind of front of the thighs, it is what we refer to as the quads, the quad, whatever you want to call it. And quad obviously means 4. Therefore, there are 4 muscles within the quadriceps. One of these muscles, which kind of lingers around the middle here, is called the rec fem, and that is the only muscle of the quads that actually crosses at the hip. So what we typically do like to do, I know a lot of you heard this before, but if you're new to the channel you may not have. So what we typically like to do is, if we lean forward a bit, so hinge at the hips ever so slightly and not rest against this back pad, we can then further shorten the rec fem, thus making the movement even more effective for the quads and allowing you to shorten the quads even further than you already were, which again is fantastic, more bang for your buck. It is definitely a really good consideration if you do leg extension, you want to get a bit more out of it. And flip it around, when you, let's say you do lean forward and you feel like, you know what, I've hit failure, I can't do any more. If you want to do a mechanical drop set, which is what we would refer to, obviously like a typical drop set, you would drop the weight by X percentage and go again. A mechanical drop set is you would change the body angle and change how the muscle is working to then be able to do a bit more. You could go from leaning forward to hit failure, to then leaning back against the pad, so then not having that rec fem as short, which will make it a bit easier, and then go to failure again, because you'll typically find that once you lean back against the pad, you'll be able to get more reps because you're not in as much of a shortened position. Try that, lean forward to failure, can't do any more, and once then lean back to failure, can't do any more again, you'll probably get a few extra reps. Another quick tip you want to kind of look out for here is when you are doing like a leg extension or something similar, look for that pivot point of the machine. So let's say it might be this red thing here, and you want to line that up with the knee joint. When it comes to like pad height, a lot of people say bring the pad higher up on the shin, although it is easier, puts less shearing force on the knee. A lot of other people say you should have the pad as close to your ankles or feet as possible. I think ultimately it comes down to what you find most comfortable and what hopefully doesn't cause you any pain or problems. And obviously now we have walking lunges. A couple of things I want to know is obviously Hanna is using straps on the walking lunges because like it is, your grip will likely give out before your lower body does. Therefore, you don't want to be limited when it comes to taking your lower body to failure by your grip, so don't be afraid to strap up. Same with any pulley movement. If your grip is ever involved and you feel like that may hold you back, then definitely don't be afraid to strap up. Another thing is, considering this is a lower body routine, we've had a good amount of glutes in there, so the reverse lunges and the hip thrusts. We've had a good amount of quads in there, so again, the reverse lunges and the leg extensions, but we haven't really had sufficient hamstrings in there. What I would typically do is, instead of this movement, I would likely include a hamstring curl variation, so like a seated leg curl perhaps, which obviously very much works the hamstrings in a lengthened position. Or if you don't have a seated curl, I know Hanna does have a lying leg curl in this gym, I have seen it before, so you could do a lying leg curl, which very much works hamstrings in a shortened position. Definitely go into more detail about that in the future if you care enough, but I'm sure to us most people don't care. I just like waffly about these things because I find them bloody interesting, because I don't have much of a life and I spend a lot of time reading things online when I should probably actually be sleeping. Yeah, I do think the inclusion of another lunge variation might be a bit much, to be honest, and I'd probably go for, like I said, a hamstring variation instead. Because although I do know this is a quad and glute focused lower body day, I think even if you are doing like a quad focused lower body day or a glute focused lower body day, you should still include other muscles of the lower body. So for example, the hamstrings, because if you do 2 lower body days, one's quad focused and one hamstrings focused, and you don't include any quad on the hamstring day and any hamstring on the quad day, you are only targeting the quads once a week and the hamstrings once a week. If you do a quad focused leg day and a hamstring focused leg day, where you even have just one hamstring movement on the quad day and one quad movement on the hamstring day, you are then targeting the hamstrings and the quads and the lower body muscles in general twice a week, so more frequency. So obviously, like I said, despite it being quad and glute focused, don't neglect to include some hamstring work in there as well. Okay, so this is taken from her new Shred Guide 2.0, which I could certainly take a look at if people want me to in the future, but let's see what she has to say about it.
I've been requested the most. Because of that, it includes more cardio slash weight loss, but you can also skip the cardio if you don't want to, if you basically don't want to do cardio. You don't have to do cardio.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I speak about this a lot, is ultimately a lot of people probably don't actually need to do like typical forms of cardio to lose weight. A lot of people could achieve their like deficit and weight loss goals by resistance training, by eating a bit less, so calorie deficit, and by moving a bit more, so not so much generic and typical forms of cardio like running and treadmill stuff, but just getting some more steps in. So if you do 6,000 steps a day, doing 8,000 steps a day, because then you're increasing your daily expenditure, which is then further adding to your calorie deficit. Again, if you want to do cardio, you can. I'm just saying for a lot of people, you actually don't need to, outside of doing more steps and just moving a bit more throughout your day.
This workout included only 4 exercises, and sometimes we don't need to chase a lot of variations of the same exercise. Sometimes it's just better to stick with the basis.
Yeah, honestly, absolutely facts. A lot of, if not most, good workout programs, again, depending on goals, are likely boring and repetitive. You get better at what you're doing, and when you can no longer get better, you change things up. There are obviously the argument of adaptation occurring, so you think about neural adaptation and things along those lines, which is actually a common question of the week, question I want to answer in the next video. But for most people, boring and effective. Just make sure whatever you're doing with high quality and high intensity, because that's really important. It's nice to see a content creator not pushing an overly complicated workout, because in all honesty, a lot of content creators, a lot of influencers online, for the sake of marketing and for the sake of social media, do really reduce the effectiveness of their workouts purely to make it look more Instagrammable or marketable, when in reality you're actually limiting what you're providing to your clients, to your audience, just because it looks a bit nicer. Boring and repetitive can often be effective. The movements as a whole, I've kind of given my thoughts on that. I think realistically 4 sets is quite excessive. You're now doing 16 working sets in a session, which it isn't stupid. I think it's probably towards the top end of what I would do personally. I think realistically I would probably reduce everything to 3 sets and add in an additional movement, so you do 5 movements, 3 sets or something along those lines. You could even reduce some things down to 2 sets, so you could do 2 sets of hip thrusts, 2 sets of lunges per leg, 3 extension, 3 dumbbell walking lunges, which instead I would actually maybe include a hamstring movement, as I said, and then maybe a 5th exercise in there as well, which could maybe be like a glute med kickback or something along those lines. I also don't tend to fill my workouts with an excessive number of movements, and it's fantastic to see that Hanna doesn't either. As a whole, really good video. Obviously a few tricks and tips in there that may help you with your training, and obviously a few improvements I feel could be made based on my personal preferences and opinions, but at the end of the day, just because Hanna and I don't align on everything doesn't mean that I don't value her as a creator and value her as a person. I think she's doing really great things, and I think a lot of the information she produces is really good, because she is a fantastic example of being a really strong individual, and I love to see it. So now we're going to obviously crack on with comment crush of the week, and there are 2 I really want to cover, so I'm going to cover the next one next week. My goals are to lose weight and gain muscle, and using Caroline's programs, I'm making progress, lost weight, gotten leaner, and gotten stronger. Fantastic, well done. The problem is that after losing the initial 20 pounds, I've kind of stopped losing weight, and whenever I check the scale, it says that whenever my weight goes up, my body fat also goes up, and my muscle mass goes down. I count calories meticulously and work out 5 to 6 days per week. I've been progressively overloading and have gone from lifting 10 to 15 pounds in some areas, and 15 to 22 pounds in others. So I must be making some kind of improvement. But checking the scale just leaves me disheartened and almost wanting to give up. Is there something I'm missing? What can I do? Weight loss is largely determined by calorie deficits. Obviously, if you're not losing weight, for most people in a lot of cases, you're likely not in a calorie deficit or in as much of a calorie deficit as you were hoping to be. But the big thing I want to actually touch on here, which I think could maybe explain a lot of things, is you said that you're tracking your body fat and your muscle mass through your scales. So this implies that you're using those scales that obviously track those metrics, so obviously body fat percentage, muscle mass, all that stuff. Realistically, they are wildly inaccurate, and I mean horrendously inaccurate. So many factors can influence those numbers. Small things even like water intake could influence those numbers. If you really do want to look at scale weight and focus on scale weight, I'd bin off those entirely, and I'd look at, are you gaining or losing weight? Obviously, if you're not losing weight, then maybe the consideration of more of a calorie deficit comes in. Move a bit more, eat a bit less sort of thing. If you're still managing to progressively overload and you're lifting more weight, that should be a pretty good indication of you're doing something right. I fully acknowledge and understand and respect how disheartening seeing muscle mass go down and body fat go up, but just because the scales are telling you that doesn't mean they're actually correct. A prime example, look at that. We look at the Blogilates DEXA scan, which is deemed to be one of the most accurate measurements and gauges of muscle mass, body fat, all those bits and bobs. Even her DEXA scan results were seemingly potentially wildly inaccurate. So if a DEXA scan can be wildly inaccurate, think about how inaccurate those scales that measure similar things might be as well. Obviously, I'd always say try and spend more time focusing on how you feel and your progression during your training. So obviously you're lifting more, which is fantastic, steps in the right direction, something must be working. If you feel better, that's also a huge thing to consider. If you want to, you can go off your look. Do you look in the mirror and say, you know what, I can see I'm making improvements? That's a huge thing to consider. Don't allow numbers to dictate your value, but if you do want to use scale weight as part of an indication of success or progress, like I said, bin off the muscle mass numbers, bin off the body fat percentage numbers. They're in the bin. They're likely not accurate. Spend more time looking at just your overall scale weight. Then you can influence things by obviously, like I said, eating less and move you a bit more to then put you in more of a calorie deficit, and then bring the number down from there. But yeah, please don't feel disheartened. You're doing bloody good stuff. You've made amazing progress. You're lifting more. You've lost weight. You are achieving your goals, and things typically do slow over time anyway. Remember how far you've come, because regardless of what the numbers tell you, you've just shown me and proven to me that you're making progress. And if you're not proud of that, I'm proud of you for achieving that. That is it. That is the video. Like I said at the start of the video, if at any point you decide you like the video, please let me know you like the video by dropping a like on the video. 1,300 likes in the first 24 hours is the goal, so if we reach out, that'd be bloody amazing. If you haven't already, please do consider clicking the red button down below to subscribe to the channel, and maybe even the bell next to it so you get notified when I upload every week, twice a week. And if you two have a question you want me to answer at the end of the next video, please do drop it down below in the comment section for comment question of the week, and I shall do so. Thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating me reliving my childhood hopes and dreams of wanting to become a firefighter, and thank you for tolerating the video.